Hi everybody, this is Jess Graham and this is my presentation for Tort Liability for Mod 13 EDL 850. Starting off with what is tort liability. It is concerning civil wrongs and it addresses the duty, breach, and injury sustained to someone as a result of another's conduct. Basically, it's you're responsible for the consequences of your conduct. There's generally two types of tort liability. The first is intentional, and that's when you purposely commit some sort of act against another person. And the most common types of intentional tort liability for educators are assault, battery, defamation, false imprisonment, and trespass to personal property. There's also unintentional tort liability, and that is just general negligence. It's failure to exercise a reasonable standard of care. And for unintentional liability, there has to be 4 elements present. The first would be standard care, and standard care is basically just using the same degree of care that any regular person would use in the same situation. Breach of duty is failing to exercise that care. Proximity or legal cause would be showing that something bad happened, basically, or that the injury happened because of the breach of duty. And then there has to be some sort of injury that's proved to have happened because of that breach of duty. And the injury could be physical or mental. Okay, the first case that I'm going to talk about is Mitchell versus Cedar Rapids Community School District. And in this case, there was a 14-year-old special ed student, a female, and she ended up being sexually abused by another special ed student who was 19. And it happened off campus. But the reason the school district was eventually found liable was because this girl had basically cut classes, and the school district didn't notify her parents that she was gone. If this happened in my district, there would definitely be discussions about the monitoring of student whereabouts and what to do if a student is missing that you knew had been there. And it's probably easier for my school because I am in a K-5 building, so that kids aren't moving from teacher to teacher. So if someone's gone, you know it right away. They would also probably talk about revisions to policies for parent contact if a student is missing, making sure that you are letting parents know that their kid is gone, and also talking about pair placements and making sure that all the pairs know who they're supposed to be with, where they're supposed to be at every point in the day. Proactive measurements, we would want to make sure that staff know about any students who have the tendency to wander. This happens a lot more with the little kids, actually. They get distracted and wander off sometimes, so you need to make sure everyone knows who has a tendency to do that. If you have students that do have more severe needs, you would want to make sure that paras are assigned to them throughout the day. And you want to have a plan in place if a kid shows up missing. You're going to search the school, contact the SRO. If you have one, make sure parents are contacted so they know what's going on. As far as ethics, it's our job to protect those kids, and sometimes that protecting them means protecting them from themselves. And if we see things that kind of start off small, but we're like, oh, this could end up being something bigger, we need to make sure we communicate that to parents so that they can deal with any issues as well. My next case is Spears versus Jefferson Parish School Board. In this case, there was a PE teacher who played a joke on a kindergarten student and made him believe that the PE teacher had killed 2 of his friends by hanging them. And the child ended up suffering from various psychological issues. He was diagnosed with PTSD, separation anxiety, and social phobia disorder, and the courts did find in favor of the family on this one, like I think they should have. Reactive measures that definitely would have been investigated. Parents would have been notified. counseling most likely would have been offered for any students involved, and the teacher probably would have been suspended pending investigation, and then eventually probably fired, because I just find that ridiculous that you would do that to students, especially to kindergartners. Proactive measurements, there would be probably discussions about behavior management plans and how to deal with students that are being disruptive in a more appropriate way. And also probably a plan for indoor PE classes that don't involve just sitting there and watching a movie. For some of these kids, PE is like the one time in the day that they get to get up and run off some of that energy, and just to expect them to sit there and watch a movie, I think, is a little unrealistic, especially for the younger kiddos. Ethics, we're there to educate kids and provide them a safe environment. You have to kind of think before you speak sometimes and make sure that you are saying things that are appropriate for students and that you're not going to traumatize them in some way. Even if you mean it to be a joke, students might not take it that way. My next case is Brown versus Tessick. In this one, some students had been in the dumpster at the school, and they had come across some cans of flammable fluid that someone had thrown in the dumpster. And kids being kids, they were using it to start fires. And it ended up where they were kind of dousing the fires with this flammable material, and another kid came around the corner and caught a fireball in the chest, basically, and had some pretty severe burns from it. The case did go all the way to the Louisiana Supreme Court, and they ended up ruling that the school board was liable for the damages to that kid that had just kind of walked around the corner. Reactive measures, definitely make sure that the policy for disposing of harmful chemicals is being followed, and we would want to make sure that there weren't any more harmful chemicals in the dumpster, and tried maybe to get it emptied as soon as possible. Proactive measures, you'd want to make sure that all employees are aware of how to dispose of dangerous chemicals properly, and even just how to store them in the classes to make sure that kids don't have access to them outside of when they're supposed to be using them. You'd also want to educate staff and students about the dangers of the chemicals that are being used in some of the classes. Some classes aren't going to have this issue, but there'll be others where kids are going to be exposed to things that could be potentially harmful, and you just want to make sure that everyone is aware of how to use them appropriately and how to dispose of them appropriately. And that just really goes with the ethics of just making sure you're keeping the kids safe and having discussions about how to protect yourself and why certain things are dangerous and what can happen if they're misused. Okay, my next case is Harris versus McRae. In this one, there was a 15-year-old student who was participating in a scheduled football practice kind of in the heat of the day, and he ended up having a heat stroke. And the family kind of sued the coach and the school district for damages related to the heat stroke. The coach was found not to be liable for any of these damages. The reactive measures, we probably would temporarily suspend outdoor practices and make sure that coaches are trained for signs of heat stroke and how to deal with that. Proactive measures, we'd probably want to consider guidelines for outdoor practices. Are there temperatures where it is too hot? We have, with our elementary kiddos, we have points where we don't go outside because it's too cold. So maybe there needs to be the other end of the spectrum too, and think about when should you maybe not be having practices outside, and how often should you be taking water breaks and things like that. And maybe even having set time if you're going to have outdoor practices. I mean, football is definitely a sport where you do need to practice outside, but is there a time of day that it's better to do it? Like maybe not between 10 and 2, which is usually the hottest time of the day. When is it safest to have the kids out there practicing that? As far as ethics go, I think coaches have a tough job when it comes to that, because kids are sometimes going to complain because they don't want to do it. They're not hurt, they're not injured, they're not sick, they just don't want to do what you want them to do. And I think it's just, you need to really get to know your kiddos and know what signs to look for when someone really is having some sort of a problem. And if you're not sure, it's probably best to to err on the side of caution and not force something that could potentially end up in an injury. Okay, my next case is Simonetti versus the School District of Philadelphia. In this one, a 5th grade student was inadvertently stabbed in the eye when he was coming in from recess, and kids were coming in from recess. He was stabbed in the eye when another student tripped. The teacher wasn't in the room. She was kind of out in the doorway monitoring the rest of the kids coming in from recess, and this kind of happened partly because there had been 3 kids that were kept in from recess related to some behavior that had happened earlier in the day. Eventually, the courts did rule in favor of the teacher and said she wasn't liable for any negligence there. Reactive measures, the administrators would have interviewed the teacher and other students to figure out what had happened. There probably would have been a review of safety procedures and dealing especially with transitions between recess and coming back in. Proactive measures, make sure to review the behavior management plans, and I'm not a huge fan of taking away recess. Sometimes when we take away recess, we still expect the kids to go outside and sometimes just have them walk laps around recess where they don't get to play, but they're still getting to burn off some of that energy that they've stored up with being inside all day. Taking away recess altogether and having them sit in class and just stare at each other is kind of frowned on in my school. Ethics, you can't be in the same place, in 2 places at the same time. You just can't. And sometimes when they're transitioning from the hallway to the classroom, it's hard to manage that, but you really need to try to keep your eye on as many of the kids as you can. And make sure if you do have to leave the classroom for some reason that someone is there to cover it. Sometimes it might just be a teacher standing in between 2 classrooms and keeping their eye on both of them for a short period of time, but you need to have some sort of a plan for if you do have to leave the room, and make sure that you go over safety procedures with the kids and tell them about things that can happen. Kids walk around with pencils all the time. I mean, they need to know what can happen if someone trips and falls and gets hurt, so just so they have an idea of that you're not trying to be an ogre and micromanage everything, but you're trying to keep them safe. And then my last slide is just the references that I used for my presentation. Thanks.